Godan dag and welcome to the Language Tavern. If you have ever studied the history of English, you have surely encountered many comments by the authors saying that the transition from Old English to Middle English is one of the most peculiar changes that have ever happened in the history of language development. If you also happen to know some German, it sure came across your mind that the grammar of Old English bears a strong similarity to the one of German and seems to be so different from the grammar of Middle English and Modern English. Joseph Emily Emonds and Jan Terje Faarlund had the same thought come across their minds. In their English, the language of the Vikings, they proposed a hypothesis that all these differences between Old English and Middle English can be explained by the fact that Middle English did not develop directly from Anglo-Saxon, but from Old Norse instead. Their main argument is that, according to modern linguistics, the vocabulary does not define language's origin. The grammar and the syntax do, the parts of the language that are most reluctant to change. The uncontroversial forerunner of modern English is the 14th century Middle English dialect spoken in the East Midlands. The region extended from the Thames in the south to the Humber in the north, the part of England that was the heart of the Danelaw. The backstory of Middle English begins with the establishment of the aforementioned Danelaw. Hundreds and thousands of new settlers came to England from Scandinavia, bringing their language with them. During the period of Danish dominance in England and the initial period of the Norman conquest, two languages, Anglo-Saxon and a version of Norse, were commonly spoken in the Danelaw and northern England, with Old Norse probably being the dominant one. Not only was Old Norse the language of the country's rulers and new settlers, but also one contemporary observer, a writer of Icelandic sagas, wrote in the 11th century. There was, at that time, the same tongue in England as in Norway and Denmark. Now, let's talk a little bit about vocabulary. Although vocabulary does not equal language's origins, there are some peculiar details regarding Middle English vocabulary. There must have been significant mingling in market towns. More males than females emigrated from Scandinavia. Therefore, many Danelaw families consisted of Norse-speaking fathers and Anglo-Saxon-speaking mothers, leading to a great deal of language contact. Emonds and Faarlund hence argue that the Scandinavians and their descendants in England had strong incentives for using cultural borrowings to massively expand their vocabulary. The Scandinavians soon became Christians and got in touch with words related to Christianity, its practices and beliefs, and concepts of monastic life. As England had been a Roman province for some 300 years, Old English borrowed some words for road building, town layouts, channeling water, building constructions that far exceeded those in the original Scandinavia-based Norse. Crops and food production must have been more varied in the moderate climate of England than in colder Scandinavia. And last but not least, Old England had a written culture, and presumably a wider use of documents and practices based on them than did Scandinavia. The integration of the lexicons of the two languages was greatly aided by the fact that the Anglian dialect, from an area with large-scale Scandinavian settlement, resembled the language of the Northmen in a number of particulars, in which West Saxons showed divergence. Many of the more common words of the two languages were identical, and if we had no Old English literature, we should be unable to say that many words were not of Scandinavian origin. These social, political, and socio-linguistic factors led further generations to use an amalgam of Anglo-Saxon and Anglo-Norse, or Anglicized Norse as it is called in the book, in their colloquial speech. All sources agree that Middle English has great numbers of both Old English and Old Norse words, and that in addition Old English and Norse had a high percentage of mutually comprehensible cognates. The new words could have supplied no real need in the English vocabulary. The Scandinavian and the English words were being used side by side, and the survival of one or another must have been a matter of chance. Of words not alike in Old English and Norse, some 1800 Middle English words designating common everyday things and fundamental concepts by either fully convincing or probable evidence come not from Old English but from Scandinavian. Old English certainly had words for the majority of these concepts and objects, yet Middle English speakers used the Norse words, not because the concepts were culturally new, but because Scandinavian parents naturally passed on large parts of their own vocabulary to their own children. There is one further indication of how the two cultures fused, which indicates Scandinavian predominance. The Norse ending son is the standard Middle English patronymic, replacing the Old English ing about the year 1200, and in the time adopted throughout the country. That is, new family names in Middle English were Norse names. This even includes the name of the Anglo-Saxon leader who was defeated by the Normans, Harold Godwinson. Another factor loosening the traditional tie between Old English and Middle English is the striking disappearance of most Old English vocabulary. It is estimated that about 85% of the 30,000 Anglo-Saxon words died out after contact with the Scandinavians and the French during 1100s and 1300s, thus suggesting that during 4 centuries Norse speakers in a new country and culture added or replaced around a third of their vocabulary with that of Old English speakers around them, who were slowly adopting Norse. Therefore, there are only 2 plausible ways to describe the change in the grammar that happened between Old English and Middle English. A. Middle English developed from Old English. Old English underwent many fundamental grammatical changes, incorporated much Norse vocabulary and became Middle English. Or B. Middle English developed from Norse. Norse underwent essentially no grammatical changes other than those initiated on the mainland, incorporated some more Old English vocabulary and became known as Middle English. Usually, the variant that demands less fundamental changes is the one that is most likely to have happened. This gives us an interesting sociolinguistic starting point. Right after the Norman conquest, England was linguistically divided into 3 groups: Norman French-speaking nobility, Anglo-Norse-speaking inhabitants of the East Midlands and North England, and Anglo-Saxon speakers of the South. This view is only supported by the insights of the contemporary people, as for instance John of Trevisa, a Cornishman who in 1387 translated a southwestern text from around year 1327. Therefore, it is that merchants, who are men of Middle England, understand better the languages on either side, northern and southern, than northerners and southerners understand each other. This author asserts that Saxon is dying out in the 14th century and limited to small numbers of illiterates despite the wondrous fact that its Kentish and Cornish speakers understand each other. Caxton's Egges story only further proves it correct. On Spessary he axiot after Egges, and the goodwife answered that she could speak no French. And the merchant was angry, for he also could speak no French, but would have had Egges, and she understood him not. And then at last another said that he would have iron. Then the goodwife said that she understood him way. Consequently, the different language of Mercia, the East England, became the lingua franca of the whole country. So this is the ending of the first part of the bigger video, and the next time we're going to talk more about grammar and other syntactic features of Middle English that seem to come from Old Norse, according to the authors. See you next time.